What do you do when your enemy builds a fortress so deep inside their own territory that they believe nothing you own can ever touch it? You build something they don't know exists. 3 nights ago, Ukraine did exactly that, and the world is only beginning to understand what just changed. Before we go any further, if you care about what's actually happening in this war, not just the headlines, hit that subscribe button right now, share this video with someone who thinks they already know the full story. And if this kind of deep, no-nonsense analysis is what you come here for, leave a like so more people can find it. Now let's get into it. There is a city called Kazan. It sits deep inside Russia, roughly 1,400 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. It is not a frontline city. It is not a city that Russian military planners ever worried about, because for the entire duration of this war, that distance meant safety. That distance meant you could build things there, store things there, manufacture things there, and no Ukrainian weapon could reach you. The Kazan ammunition manufacturing complex was not just any factory. It was Russia's single largest facility for producing 152mm artillery shells. These are the shells feeding the guns that have been pounding Ukrainian positions day after day across the Eastern Front. Without a steady supply of these shells, Russian artillery, one of its most powerful advantages on the battlefield, starts to go quiet. Russian planners knew this, so they protected it. They surrounded it with some of the most advanced air defense systems in their arsenal. They treated it as what it was, a strategic asset, a pillar of the war machine, something that had to be kept alive at all costs. And they believed, with complete confidence, that no Ukrainian weapon could reach it. They were wrong. What hit the Kazan complex was not a modification of an existing drone. It was not a repurposed commercial system with a longer battery. It was something entirely new. Something Ukrainian engineers had been quietly building for at least 18 months under strict secrecy, with zero observable signatures in open-source intelligence reporting. Russian military intelligence had no file on it, no threat assessment, no intercept timeline built around it. Because as far as Russian intelligence was concerned, this weapon did not exist until it did. Let's talk about what made this weapon different, because the details here are not just interesting. They explain everything about why this strike succeeded when by every reasonable expectation, it should have been stopped. The first thing to understand is the range. This drone flew approximately 1,400 kilometers from launch point to impact. Think about what that number actually means on a map. It means all of European Russia is now inside potential Ukrainian strike range. Moscow, St. Petersburg. The industrial complexes scattered across the Ural region that Russian planners had long considered untouchable. The idea that Ukraine could only threaten targets near the border, that idea died the night this drone hit Kazan. The geographic assumption that gave Russia's rear areas their sense of safety simply no longer holds. But range alone does not explain how the drone got through. Plenty of things have range. What makes this weapon genuinely different is what it looked like to radar, or more precisely, what it didn't look like. Ukrainian engineers built this system from the beginning with a stealth airframe. That means the geometry of the drone, the materials it was made from, the way its surfaces were shaped and treated, all of it was specifically designed to return the smallest possible radar signature. Not just smaller than a missile, smaller than anything Russian air defense operators had been trained to intercept in this context. The result was that the Russian radar network around Kazan, a network protecting one of the most important facilities in the entire Russian defense industrial system, detected this drone approximately 40 seconds before it hit. Not 40 minutes, 40 seconds. 40 seconds is not enough time to scramble a response. The minimum engagement timeline for the S-400 air defense batteries protecting that complex, the time required from detection to a successful intercept, was around 90 seconds. The drone arrived more than a full minute before the system could have stopped it, not because the Russian air defense failed mechanically, but because the math was never going to work in their favor. Ukrainian engineers had studied exactly how long Russian air defense needed to respond. Then they built a weapon that took that time away. That is not luck. That is cold, deliberate engineering. The third piece is precision. When this drone hit the Kazan complex, it did not hit a wall or a parking lot or an outer structure. It hit the primary assembly hall, specifically the area housing the automated shell-filling equipment that is the core of what made Kazan so productive. And it impacted within 3 meters of its intended aim point. 3 meters, at the end of a 1,400-kilometer journey. This kind of precision cannot be achieved by GPS guidance alone, especially not in an environment where Russian electronic warfare systems were actively working to jam and spoof incoming drones. Ukrainian engineers solved this problem with an electro-optical terminal guidance system. In plain terms, as the drone approached its final destination, it navigated by comparing what its camera saw against a preloaded image of the target. It was essentially flying by sight, and electronic warfare cannot blind something that relies on its eyes, not on radio signals. Every one of these three elements, the range, the stealth, the precision, would be impressive on its own. Combined in a single operational system, tested in combat for the first time against one of Russia's most protected facilities, and succeeding on that first use. This is something else entirely. Now, let's talk about what was actually destroyed, because the explosion matters less than what it means for the next 12 to 18 months of this war. The Kazan complex was generating roughly 1.2 million 152mm artillery shells per year. That single facility accounted for approximately 18% of Russia's total domestic artillery shell production capacity. When you remove 18% of any supply chain, the effects do not show up immediately. There are stockpiles, there are other facilities still running, there are imports from North Korea and Iran that have been partially plugging gaps for months. But here is what those numbers actually mean in practice. Russia's artillery supply system was already under strain before this strike. The pace of operations on the Eastern Front demands ammunition faster than domestic production alone can replace it. North Korean shells have been arriving in significant quantities, but reporting has consistently flagged serious quality control problems. Shells that misfire, that underperform, that create risk for the crews firing them. The imports have helped, but they have not fully solved the underlying production gap. The Kazan strike hits a system that was already stretched. It does not snap that system in half overnight, but it accelerates a degradation that was already in motion. Frontline units that were already receiving reduced shell allocations will now receive allocations that are reduced further. Artillery crews that were already being told to conserve ammunition will be told to conserve more aggressively. Fire missions that would have been approved will start getting denied. And the damage is not something Russia can fix quickly. An artillery shell production facility is not a warehouse. The specialized tooling, the precision equipment, the trained workforce, the quality control infrastructure, these take years to build from scratch. Russian planners assessing restoration timelines are not talking about months. They are talking about years. Before the Kazan production capacity can be replaced elsewhere in the Russian system, the frontline units bearing the consequences of that missing 18% will absorb every bit of the shortage. This is how industrial warfare actually works. You do not win it in a single explosion. You win it by making the math stop adding up for the other side. One strike, one shortage, one allocation cut at a time. You're still here, which means you already know this is more than just a news story. So here's a challenge for you. Pause right now and drop a comment with one word that describes what you think Russia's military planners felt when they realized what had just hit Kazan. Just one word. And then keep watching, because we're not done yet. Let's step back and look at what this strike actually signals, not just for Kazan, but for the entire strategic logic of this war. Russia's military planning for this conflict has rested on a foundational assumption for 3 years. That assumption is called strategic depth. The idea is simple. If your key military assets, your production facilities, your logistics hubs, your command infrastructure are far enough behind the front lines, they are safe. The enemy cannot reach them, so you can build there, stockpile there, plan from there without having to worry about them being targeted. That assumption shaped where Russia built things, where it stored things, how much air defense it devoted to protecting those things, and how confident it felt about the long-term sustainability of its war effort. The Kazan strike did not just damage a factory, it destroyed that assumption. Every Russian military planner who has been positioning assets east of the Volga River on the basis that those assets were beyond Ukrainian reach now has to rethink. Dispersal plans designed around the safety of distance need to be rewritten. Logistics infrastructure sitting at what were considered safe depths now needs additional air defense coverage. Coverage that has to come from somewhere, which means it gets pulled away from somewhere else. Command and control facilities that were cited for convenience rather than protection because they were assumed to be safe now need hardening programs or relocation. This is the cascading effect of a single strategic demonstration. It is not that Ukraine is going to destroy every Russian facility tomorrow. It is that Russia now has to act as if it might. And that forces Russia to spread its defensive resources thinner across a much larger area than it was protecting before, which weakens its defensive coverage everywhere, which opens new opportunities it did not previously create. There is also a dimension here that does not appear in satellite imagery or shell production statistics. It is the psychological dimension. The Russian military system, like any large institution, runs on assumptions. When a foundational assumption breaks, the effect does not just show up in revised planning documents, it shows up in the confidence of the people making decisions. Commanders who believed certain things were safe now know they were wrong about what safe meant. That kind of institutional reckoning changes how decisions get made, how aggressively forces are committed, and how much risk planners are willing to accept in their operational designs going forward. A weapon that can reach anywhere and that nobody knew existed is not just a military tool, it is a psychological one. Now let's give credit where it is actually due. Ukraine built this weapon in wartime. Not in a peacetime defense acquisition program with years of development cycles and full-scale testing ranges. Not with the institutional resources of a major military power with decades of advanced weapons development behind it. In wartime, under constant operational pressure, under the kind of secrecy that prevented not just Russia, but most Western open-source analysts from knowing the program existed. The engineering challenge here was enormous. Building a drone with a 1,400-kilometer range requires solving difficult problems in propulsion, fuel efficiency, and structural design. Building a stealth airframe requires deep materials, science expertise, and precise manufacturing tolerances. Building terminal guidance that defeats electronic warfare requires sophisticated sensor integration and image-matching software. Doing all of that simultaneously, quietly, in a country actively at war, without the ability to conduct open long-range test flights that would have revealed the program's existence, and then deploying it successfully on its first operational use against one of the most defended targets in Russia, represents a level of engineering discipline and institutional competence that many Western assessments of Ukrainian capability have not fully credited. Ukraine has been underestimated consistently throughout this conflict. On the battlefield in the early weeks of the war, in its ability to absorb and integrate Western weapons systems, in its capacity to conduct complex combined arms operations, in its resilience under sustained missile and drone attack on its civilian infrastructure. The Kazan strike is one more demonstration that the underestimation was wrong. This should matter to Western policymakers, to defense analysts, and to anyone trying to form an accurate picture of where this war is actually heading. Ukraine's military and engineering institutions have been performing at a level that the available resources alone would not predict. The Kazan strike is a data point for what Ukrainian institutions can do when given the space and the support to develop capabilities in depth. And here is the question that naturally follows. If Ukraine built and successfully deployed this system in secret over 18 months, what else is currently in development? The logic of a covert weapons program that succeeds is not to stop. It is to keep going, to build on what worked, to develop the next generation while the first is still operational. The engineers who built the system that hit Kazan learned things in that development process that they are already applying to whatever comes next. Russia does not know what that next system looks like. Neither does anyone outside a small group of Ukrainian engineers and commanders. But the Kazan strike tells us it is worth taking seriously the possibility that Ukraine has more surprises in development, systems targeting production nodes, logistics corridors, or command infrastructure that Russian planners currently believe are fully protected. The strategic picture of this war shifted 3 nights ago. Not because of the shells that will no longer be produced at Kazan, though that matters. Not even because of the air defense failure that let a stealth drone fly 1,400 kilometers into a Category 1 protected facility, though that matters enormously. It shifted because Ukraine demonstrated in a single operational moment that the geographic and technological boundaries Russia had assumed were fixed are not fixed. That the sanctuary Russia had built for itself in depth does not exist anymore in the way it once did. Wars are not just fought with weapons, they are fought with what each side believes is possible. Russia entered this strike believing Kazan was untouchable. It will never believe that about any of its rear area facilities again. Ukraine, meanwhile, enters the morning after this strike knowing something it has worked for 18 months to prove, that it can reach anywhere. That distance is no longer a defense, that the war it is fighting is not just a defensive struggle to hold the line, it is increasingly a contest over the entire strategic depth of Russian military power. That is a different war than the one that started 3 years ago. And the side that understands the change fastest will be the side with the initiative going forward. There is one more thing worth sitting with as this analysis closes. The people who built this weapon are not generals in a headquarters far from the consequences. They are engineers and soldiers in a country that has been absorbing missile strikes on its cities, its hospitals, its power grid, and its people for 3 years. They built something extraordinary under conditions that most defense programs would not survive. They built it in the dark, under pressure, without the guarantee that it would work, and when they flew it for the first time in combat, it hit its target within 3 meters after a 1,400-kilometer journey through defended airspace. That is not just a military fact. It is a statement about what people are capable of when the alternative is losing everything. This war is not over. The Kazan strike is not the end of anything. It is a signal about capability, about resolve, about what Ukraine is still building, that changes the calculation going forward in ways that will take months to fully understand. Stay informed, stay engaged, because the developments that come after nights like this one are exactly the ones that matter most. If this analysis gave you something real to think about, share it right now with someone who needs to hear it. Not just a like, actually send it to someone. Let the algorithm know this kind of depth deserves to be seen. And subscribe if you're not already, because the next development in this war will not wait, and neither will we.